Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and today we have the amazing, the awesome Oksana Esberard. Oksana, how are you today?
I'm feeling awkward.
Good, then you are in the right place. So Oksana is one of my newest neighbors in the Northwest. We're so glad to have you here. But it's not where we met. We met at NLV a couple years ago. So Oksana, we'd love to hear a little bit about you. What do you have exciting going on right now you want to tell the world about?
Right. Well, I am well-being strategist. So everything that I do in my business and personal life and my hobbies and passion rotates around well-being. And right now it's quite relevant, as all of us know. And so my whole message and purpose created around shifting from culture of stress to culture of well-being, because I believe that what's happening with us right now, it's not something that happened overnight because some virus got discovered. It's actually been a trajectory that we've been on for quite some time. And now it's a good signal to start changing that trajectory and really shifting the mindset from that culture of us accepting stress as a norm and going with so much things at once and starting to really embracing different principles. So that's exciting for me.
Yeah, that is. I'm glad to hear you call out the idea that it wasn't just because of a pandemic, because I feel like some of the people that I witnessed and noticed who were having the hardest time dealing with changes this last year were people who were using a lot of the activities and things as a distraction from kind of being alone in their own space. So when they had to sit at home in a silent space without the ability to go out and use some sort of way to distract themselves, those were the people that I saw who seemed to have the biggest meltdowns over being the cooped up part. But
yeah, I don't want to generalize. I don't like to generalize. There are different people, different scenarios, and everybody has their own cracks and weaknesses and different. But as a humanity, as a collective, I can say that any storm in life, whether it's wars or any disturbances, economics downfall, pandemics like we're going through right now, it shows the cracks. It shows where we have let go and where we dropped the ball. And well-being, mental and emotional stability has been on decline since it's been on decline, but that decline is rising. So it's a little bit of an awkward moment there, but it's been going on since the Great Depression, since World War II, since 2000s. It's been climbing. The rates of suicide, the illnesses, mental wellness, mental health illnesses, all that has been steadily on rise. And the pandemic just kind of magnified it in such a way that it became impossible not to look at it, because we started to feel the pain inside, and that became obvious.
Yeah, that's the point where all of a sudden we are then able to feel it directly ourselves. When it's interesting to hear you mention the suicide rates and the mental health diagnoses and things, because there is a way to measure it and there is a way to see what's out there and where we're going. So it's something that I think mental health is so important, but individually it always feels so vague until we are overwhelmed. So
absolutely. Well, I want to switch it for the positive side. It's something that I'm really proud and excited about. We just talked behind the scenes that I had my birthday last week, and just woke up, talked to my friends in India who live there full time, and heard about all this horrific thing that media portrayed. And I said, is that true? And they said, well, not entirely, but yes, it's bad. And so I just decided to do this spontaneous fundraiser for India out of just one 5-minute conversation. And we're sending $4,200 to local villages, which is going to create a lot of impacts for hundreds of people. So
that's such a beautiful thing. And I love that how spontaneous it is, because, we can help people, and our money can go, when we all pool our money, it goes so much further. And it's like, if you can only give $5 or $10, when you put it all together, all of a sudden you have $4,200. That's amazing.
Right.
So Well, that's why we're excited about what you're doing, because it's beautiful. It's an important thing, and you're making the world better just by helping people, find that mental space.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. So Oksana, I do have to ask you, what is that awkward you've had to own?
Oh boy, you really want to know?
I
It's very
do.
awkward. It's very, very awkward. Well, it has to do something with my Russian upbringings. If your listeners haven't caught up yet to my accent, then I'm gonna break the news. I'm originally from Russia. I'm born and raised there in the Soviet Union, and the accent sometimes shines through, whether I want it or not, whether I register or not. But I can make up some words or I can mispronounce some words.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the the things started pretty innocently for me once I moved to the United States. I was misplacing crayons for croutons. The worst was one in the business school where I said condoms instead of condos.
Oh.
The same thing, and I said it publicly. But then I was speaking in the MIT, and I know this friend of mine and a client for 2 years. And, I teach about mental resiliency, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, meditation, and the word focus. It's a very important word. I use it a lot. And so we were catching up right before my speech the next day. And 2 years forward, my friend is finally says, Oksana, I need to tell you something. You need to pronounce the word focus. And I said, what do I said it is? And he said, fuck us.
Oh no.
Because in Russian it's focus. So
Uh-huh.
kind of like it's very similar, but
Yeah.
not that much. So my brain did it as focus. And so this whole time of 2 years of my career, I've been telling this wrong words to people.
Right.
And he didn't want to tell me because I was like, why didn't you tell me sooner? And he's like, well, it was so cute. I really enjoyed it.
Right.
Now it's time. And so I had to really, really practice pronunciation for that one. And it took me a number of months till I could nail it. And even still, I need to slow down every time before I say it to just make sure I'm in the right line in there.
Yeah, that I can imagine. That's, a good friend will tell you those kind of things, right? They'll be willing to say, here's something that you should be aware of just for future. But how did you feel when he told you that, and when you became aware that you've been saying that word in such a way?
Well, I was deeply embarrassed, but here's the second part of the story. So I was nervous already. I'm speaking to 100 entrepreneurs, super smart people at MIT, and I'm nervous, right? Naturally. And now he tells me that I'm mispronouncing key words in my presentation, and in a big way. And so as I was presenting the next day, I was really mindful, and I was just pausing every time before I would say this word. I'll pause and do it. My presentation was 90 minutes. After about 30 minutes of doing so, my brain was burning. Not only I was kind of trying to create a presentation and experience, but also I needed to now monitor my language and really pause with it. I wasn't in a flow. I wasn't in a flow state to do it like I usually do. And after about 45 minutes, I literally said it inside myself. I'm like, that's it. And I just stopped monitoring myself. And I know that I was mispronouncing the word for the rest of my presentation, but at least I was able to finish it with peace and quiet. And he was just like, it was very obvious that you gave up after about 45 minutes. I'm like, yes.
Well, and that's the thing, is when we're focusing so much on that little detail, it takes us out of the space of what we're so good at. And
absolutely, yes, it was.
Yeah, and it also, it becomes a distraction from, like you're saying, the audience knows they can probably pick up when you're having to stop and pause and kind of think through something versus just have it natural.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, your accent is beautiful. It's one of the things I love about you, by the way. I find accents to just bring so much character. And we meet people and we don't always know a lot about them. And when we physically see people, sometimes we can tell a little bit about them based on how they present themselves or how they dress. And when people open up and speak, then all of a sudden it gives this other, hey, they might be from a different part of the world than I'm from. And then it becomes this, I might not even know where they're from, but just the idea that they don't speak the same way that I do, to me, is always exciting, because I know that I'm meeting someone who has a story that is even more different than mine in ways that I might not have already known. So,
Well, that's my favorite game when people ask me where I'm from, because I confuse them with my name. My last name is not my real last name from Russia. And so I always
Okay.
say, like, where do you think I'm from? And believe it or not, people don't put Russia or like, any Slavic countries first. Usually it's like
Hmm.
Norway, Scandinavia, Switzerland. So I was like,
Okay.
I'm doing great.
Yeah, and in Tacoma here, we have a lot of people from Slavic countries, but not necessarily Russia. So a
Yeah.
lot of people will guess Russian, but it's more often than not Ukrainian or something different. So I always try not to guess because I don't want to. I don't want to assume, and we have the same thing with we have a lot of people from different parts of Asia, and so there are people from China and Korea and Japan and Vietnam, and so I can always uh, tell sometimes the difference in a little bit of an accent once people tell me, but I don't want to be the one to kind of guess. But anyway, that's a whole nother game and a lot of fun. So moving forward, you found this out right before a big presentation. You had this nervousness and you realized you needed to give up. In that moment when you were 45 minutes in and you said, okay, I'm giving up, I'm going to pronounce it. How was that for you? Did you feel, I could imagine feeling maybe defeated that you had to give up on focusing, or maybe relieved because you were now able to kind of get back into that flow.
Yeah, it's more relief, but also giving yourself the permission. But I learned a very valuable lesson in that. One is, be prepared as much as you can, and I did my best at that moment. It was too soon to correct the ingrained in the brain behavior, but I
Mm-hmm.
did prepare for all the rest of it did prepare me for all the rest of the presentations moving forward. And two is the importance of the flow state and natural flow of things versus constantly trying to control. When we, like, just like you said, when you try to control, when you try to force, when you try to pause too much, is just not as enjoyable for the audience or for the work or for the outcomes
Mm-hmm.
as if we surrender, we prepared, we did our best, and then we surrender and we deliver to our best capabilities in that time, in that space. And that usually produces the best results. And I always say no resistance, because suffering is pain times resistance. So pain is unavoidable because I was putting myself on the spot, but I chose not to suffer by not resisting it anymore. So
I love that because we basically make it worse by trying to resist it, and that's a really good way to look at it. I talk a lot with people about acceptance and about living authentically, and one of the things that I talk about, which is so similar in what you just described, is that if if we're spending 30 or 40% of our energy on faking it or on fitting in, that's 40% more energy we could be putting on our success or our happiness or our well-being. And I would rather have 100% focus on what um, what I'm doing. And I'm not purposely using the word focus. That's just how I usually say it. And now I'm self-conscious about using that
I
word.
don't
But it's more fun the way you say it, though, because it is fun when you hear. I think there is an art to hearing someone speak with an accent too, where if you don't hear the word pronounced the way it is in its native tongue, it actually makes you a better listener, because as a listener in the audience, we have to slow down and be more conscious about the words. And so then if I'm having to think about what word was meant to be said, I'm paying much better attention. So in a way, that could be a beautiful gift you're bringing to the audience too. Anytime you have a word that may not sound exactly, you're kind of pulling them into that moment. But
Well, I'm stealing that. I'm just going to keep saying, like, this all is made up for you to embrace more mindfulness in your listening skills.
exactly, I think you should just call it out right at the beginning.
Yes.
So moving forward, I know you said you've had to continue to be diligent about how you say, especially that word. Uh, did you then set aside time to practice it, or how did you take those next steps before further presentations?
Well, one is I actually started to say in the beginning of each presentation, and I still do it up to date, that I am Russian originally and that there are going to be words that I'm going to mispronounce and then going to be words that I'll make up. Just do your best to understand me. And
Mhm.
so kind of opening the elephant in front of the room gives me the permission to be myself, and they are prepared. I warned them, right? Like, I didn't hide anything. And so it's much more received, kind of talking about the biggest flaw. I mean, I don't see it really as a flaw, but some people may consider it as a flaw. There's sometimes expectations that there needs to be perfections in certain terms and languages. And so I just put it up front right in the very beginning, even before I kind of say my credentials. And that diffuses the bomb. And then with myself, yes, I literally had to practice. I told a number of people, like, if you hear me saying it this way, please tell me. And I just repetition, and asking Americans, I'll pronounce it, and I'm like, is that how it is? And they're like, yes. And then it took me a few more blunders to mess it up, and cause a lot of laughters, even during meditations that I did. And that probably engraved it in my brain a little further.
Yeah, I love that you call it out at the beginning, because I think that does two things. One is it reminds people that someone doesn't have to be perfect across the board in every single way in order to bring a great value to whatever they're sharing and teaching us. Because that's one thing that I think a lot of times we make that mistake, especially when we have any insecurities in ourselves. We beat ourselves up in that way. So then we project that sometimes onto others. And when I started doing stand-up comedy, that was a lesson they taught us, was when we get on stage, the first thing we have to do is call out our awkwardness or disability or whatever it is, anything that we have. It's our job at the very beginning of our set to point that out to the audience, because otherwise the audience will be sitting there distracted by that the entire time. And they are thinking about, when's he going to talk about that weird mustache on his face? Like, that's sitting there, and, you don't want them distracted the whole time thinking about what it is or why you're talking differently or why you have a crutch or whatever it is that you get on stage with. And so by pointing it out right away, now it gives them freedom to laugh or to engage in the presentation. And I think that's such a great, confident way to do it too, because you say, look, this doesn't matter. This is why I'm here, but you will see this. And then that brings you all together in the room right away. So I love that.
Yeah. And also, I'm yet to see people that didn't shed a smile when I say that. And, it's the moment of vulnerability of showing, you're also human, and it helps people to relax themselves, because a lot of time the message is not received because they feel some kind of imperfection, vulnerability in them. Ultimately, everything that we feel, any rejection of the other, is rejection of the self. And so if they have any kind of constraints and mental constraints in their head about anything, they like, some people may look at me and see that I'm blonde, and they think that, sorry, generalizing again, all blondes are stupid. They shut off, like right. The message is not going to be received. And I'm really, really generalizing right now, but sure. Kind of diffusing a lot of these things and putting yourself on vulnerable note, it opens up the people, and humor always helps to break any boundaries. So
it does. And when someone shares something like that, like you share about yourself, just even as simple as where you're from, we've learned something about you. So all of a sudden I feel a little closer to you before we even start the presentation. And that is always so valuable too. So how have you seen that now, since you've owned that awkward and you're sharing it as soon as you get in front of the group and you've practiced a little bit? Because there is that fine line in practicing and striving to do better and to improve our skills, but also balancing not beating up ourselves over not being good enough. I find that that's something that we read self-help books, we look at ways to improve ourselves, and if we do that too much, we lean into that we're beating ourselves up, we get into imposter syndrome, we get into feelings of not enoughness. But how has that been for you as you've practiced and moved forward? How does that feel now as you kind of get into the next stages?
It's interesting transition, because since I moved to the United States, I had a lot of grudges on my motherland, and I felt like I don't want to be part of it. There was a lot of trauma in there. There was a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, and I was denying my heritage internally. I never publicly did it, but internally I was resentful, and I didn't want to be Russian. I wanted to be something else. And now that I'm evolving and maturing with everything around it, I actually started to embrace it in a way that creates this opportunity in the story for people to see different perspectives. And instead of completely denying it, I'm using it to the advantage to deliver a stronger message, because Russian population, with the amount of wars, with the amount of history, with the amount of tragedies that we went through psychologically, mentally, and emotionally, is a challenged nation. There's been a lot of poverty that my family, my ancestors experienced, and it's very visible in the mental and emotional makeup that Russian people have. A lot of people say, like, are you sure you're Russian? You smile too much. Right? Like that one perspective. And the other perspective, a lot of people usually say, like, well, but you don't have a heavy Russian accent. And then I'll just have to start, well, if you'll ask me something, I'll answer you in a heavy Russian accent. So then I'll start to really, really fake it, which takes me concentration, but I can speak in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've seen so many great parts of Russian culture just in the art and the architecture, and there's so many great things. And I think when we come from a place where, we do this with our own lives internally, where we don't always see some of the great things because we may have been more exposed to the tougher parts, or because the tougher parts have overshadowed the greatness in the culture. And so I can understand how that could be a tough thing to kind of move on from. But so you're in the US now, you're out there. When we were at NLV, you walked us through meditation and mindfulness. There were two things. One was mindfulness and meditation, and the other one was how to properly hug. And I always remember that lesson because it took hugging to a new level for me, where it actually made you in the moment of, if you're going to embrace somebody, you should be kind of thoughtful in that moment. And these are the types of things you are, and you're talking to CEOs and companies and teaching the companies. How do you pull wellness into corporate lifestyle?
That's a great question. One, I have not been teaching much of the hugging, granted the pandemic. So
sure.
Let's be clear on that.
Yeah, I should mention this was pre-pandemic lesson.
Yes, we met in a conference that was pre-pandemic, so that was relevant. Since then, I'm holding on to my hug theory for a later date. The important thing for anything that comes through business into business is to make sure that people understand that it's not a woohoo thing that is good and touchy-feely, but it actually produces measurable results for the organizations, for the bottom lines, for the customers, and for themselves. And with that in mind, they're more eager to listen. So the numbers of productivity go up in millions of dollars for the organization that embrace the cultural well-being. The rates of turnover go down in millions of dollars that people and organization that embrace that. And then pure medical costs, the healthcare costs for the companies and their medical insurances and the claims and PTOs and the number of sick days, absenteeism, presenteeism. So there are really good markers for that could be compared for the companies that continue this go overachiever at all cost mentality, and companies that say, wait a second, let us look at that. And I believe that any growth oriented conscious leadership and CEOs that know that competitive advantage is not a guaranteed price fight or cost fight, it's people investment. And if they understand the whole aspect of the growth and how to continue to develop people, every conscious smart CEO would know now that the next level is the mental game. Is no longer based on who produces cheaper part. It's resiliency, it's agility, it's how do you pivot in times like this? How resilient people are to work from home, or are they going to be whining and requesting and breaking down because things are tough for them. So all these things that companies, still fewer percentage, is willing to look at it as the next step in this competitive advantage that they could really embrace and take part in. And my goal and purpose is to really change the makeup of business environment. That's why I talk about culture. That's why I talk about shifting from culture of stress. And I would put culture of productivity there, because we value productivity at all costs. That leads us to trouble. To shifting to culture of well-being, where success is included, productivity is included. We're just going at it with a total different route and a different angle, where there is no downsides. It's only upsides for everybody.
I love that idea of just switching our mindset on what the culture is about, because I think a lot of times if we look at a business who simply just says, we're going to add this program in and call it a program, we're going to focus on well-being. Well, if we're not changing the culture, we're not actually changing, kind of giving permission to focus on well-being and have that be the main area that we give our attention. And if in the back of our mind, we know that we still need to put all of our attention and energy into production, which becomes stressful, that's still a culture of stress and production versus a culture of well-being that you kind of have to put the brakes on where you're at in order to shift your attention. And then you can actually, the other stuff will all still happen. And like you said, this stuff will happen even better once your well-being is in place.
Yes, I mean, think about it. When do you do your best work? When do you produce the most outcome? I think everybody would agree that if you are happy, healthy, then you're producing inspiring work. It's like that. It's innate in us. There's nothing that we really need to strive. When producing and work becomes a chore, becomes hard work, is when we're not well on some kind of level.
Yeah.
Our family may not be well, our physical health may not be well, we're sleepless, we are tired, we are stretching our limit. And then at the end of that, when you have that result, do you really feel happy and satisfied? A lot of people say no, and they burn out and they feel resentful and they quit. And that's why turnover rates are so high.
Yeah, people go as far as they can, and then the only out that they see is to jump off the ship.
Yep.
I know for myself, a couple of years back when I was working on writing, and I was working on a book that I finally came out with in January, but things looked like they were going really well, and I felt like I had things, going down the right path, but I was so busy, I couldn't write. And every time I sat down to write, I couldn't produce any work that was any good. And I actually had to leave for a couple days. I went to the beach and I found a place to camp. I texted my sister, said, I'm driving north on 101. I don't know where I'm going to go, but just if you never hear from me, that's the direction my car went. And the rules for my trip were that I wasn't going to get on any social media or any computer other than typing. But I didn't listen to any music other than classical music, because I use that when I write. But I didn't want any outside influence. So no media, no TV, no contact. And in that trip, it was a 4-day trip, and it took me until, the second day before I could actually clear my mind enough and have things slow down that I felt like I could start to write again. And now I do that every year. I set aside some time for a couple of days where I just pause and reset, because I find myself that things are getting too busy in my head that I can't slow down. And now the step that I need to do, and I'm getting a little better at, is putting that space into every day. I think about NLV when I learned how to meditate, because that was so helpful. And that was the first time I ever really got to that clarity. And I've tried to recreate that, and I need to give it a lot more practice, because it is a skill.
Absolutely. Well, I could totally relate to this experience when I was writing my book, Next Level You. It took me, I think, four months, as I was pairing it with work, to write like 4 chapters. It has 8 chapters. And then I went to India, and I got 10 days with India. At that time did not have much internet and did not have that much distractions. And so the rest of the 4 chapters I finished in 10 days. So
Wow.
it was like 4 months I was writing that and reshuffling, and then no distractions, being in this one time, one space, and devoting time. And I finished it in 10 days. And it was like, okay, this is what I need to do.
Right.
I need to do this assignment, just like you do the retreats.
Yeah, you just need to kind of close out the distractions sometimes. And your book, it is available. It's Next Level You. It's on, I found it on Amazon. Where's the best place to buy it?
Amazon is still kind of the main distribution center, so I'm only keeping it on Amazon. Makes a lot of things on the logistics easy. So, but it will show some tips on meditation and more than that. So, I hope you found it useful.
Yes, definitely. I need to go back and I with books, I find that I read them and then I go back and I need to re-reference them just to kind of put the practices into place, which is what I need to get better at. So,
well, we talked in the beginning and we were talking about YouTube. I'm actually this week, I'm not going to date the podcast, but this week I was doing the challenge and I'm going to upload the 5 days of this challenge onto YouTube so everybody can return and come back and practice. And some of them are breathing and some of them are meditative and there are different sorts of practices that we teach inside companies. But we wanted to celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month in May in this way. So there are going to be more resources, including this podcast on our YouTube channel, which is SattvaMe.
Excellent. So while you're watching this, if you're not watching it on SattvaMe, go over there, follow Oksana's channel and start getting mindful. So Oksana, what advice would you leave our listeners on how they can own their awkward?
Well, I think one is admit it to yourself. First of all, if you have a great friend that could point out something, that's one step. But so often than not, we resistant to that feedback, right? We can get defensive. And so it's whatever feedback we get from the external world. And it's a little easier for me because I'm foreigner no matter where I go. So I have to listen to other people. But when we are not, we can get defensive, but really evaluate and see, well, okay, maybe I do have this, what can be perceived weakness, and then get creative of how you can turn it into strength. Like you pointed out the trick with stand-up comedy. If you point it out first, then nobody else can really hurt you with pointing that out anymore. But you need to own it to be comfortable to point it out, to disarm other people and say the things that could potentially raise questions first. And that starts with really self-awareness and knowing yourself. That always goes back to training that self-awareness, because unfortunately, in today's age and time, being so pulled by information of so many distractions, influences, we do not know ourselves. We really don't. And everything is so outward, and we constantly paying attention to this next shiny thing, news, media, people, that we barely spend time. So my best advice would be close your eyes, stay inward, besides the sleep, and really examine yourself as much as you can. And meditation is a wonderful tool to start there. Not accessible for some people. So just getting quiet time by yourself and self-reflecting in whatever form or shape is welcoming you, then you must do that. We must do it all together as a society right now.
Yeah, I love just the simple way that you pointed out the fact that so much of what we're doing is outward facing, that it's as simple as just taking the time to look in, because if we don't, we'll never know ourselves.
Yeah, that's just the law. And I would say by me, I meditate, I stay inward, I have quiet time, I have a lot of white space in my calendars every single day. And if I don't do it, I get swept just like everybody else with all the years of practice that I'm doing. It takes a week to put me off whack. To just start following everybody else's rhythms. So it's an ongoing practice. It's a culture. It's an internal self culture.
Now I'm glad to hear you say that, because I look at people who do these things and I see you out there doing all this great stuff, and I think, where do I find that space, and how does she stay in the zone all the time? But that's true. No matter how good we are, whatever our skill is, we always got to kind of reset sometimes. So,
well, do you want a big secret about it?
Yes, please.
I know my weaknesses and I know how outward I am. I'm extreme extrovert. And so the company that I founded, SattvaMe, was actually founded on a very selfish idea of all of you guys holding me accountable to practice, because if I'm doing something and I'm teaching it, I must practice it myself. Otherwise, I'm not authentic. Otherwise, I'm just say as I do, not as I do as I say, not as I do, right?
Right.
So my business holds me accountable to keep going with all these practices.
I love that. It does. It kind of puts you in the spot of, if this is what I'm doing, this is going to keep me on track.
So thank you for holding me accountable today.
Hey, we are glad to, and we are all going to get out there and get practiced on our mindfulness and watch the YouTube videos and pay attention to Mental Health Month for May, and definitely use that as a stepping stone to keep it going forward. So Oksana, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Everybody, all of the links to Oksana's website and social media are in the description of the episode. So please follow her, give her some support, buy the book Next Level You, and do it for yourself. You know, we want to support Oksana, but for you, get out there and get into some good mental space. So thank you so much, Oksana. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to hear from all of your listeners, and definitely looking forward to meditating in some space and possibly having a hug, an awkward one.
Yes, back to awkward hugs. Yes. And as always, everybody, don't forget to own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.